So before we get started, it may help to just kind of look at a map here, and this is a Fortune 500 map, and it's just under visualizations. If you wanted to look it up, but basically, you can see that a lot of these companies are still coming from America, and interestingly, Japan in the 1990s, which you can't really even see Japan on this, which is kind of funny, actually had like 60% of the total market capitalization of all the stocks on Earth. And that's basically because a lot of people were buying foreign cars from Japan and things like that. So in this graph, if you look at the details, you can kind of see a couple things. So I circled this green area in America, and interestingly, it's kind of centered around the center here, and that's perhaps because of companies like down there in Houston, in Texas. So there's kind of a surprising number of companies there. And then you can see some big companies kind of on the West Coast, but I circled the East Coast in orange there just to kind of say, hey, like, not a whole lot of companies, and yet it's all kind of traded in New York Stock Exchange. So that's interesting. And then you can see that big dot around Saudi Arabia there with, basically one of the largest companies in the world. So that size of dot is basically $1 trillion, that one in between Africa and India there. And then Europe, you can kind of see all those circles. And Europe looks pretty healthy overall, right? It's a lot of different ideas and just different sizes of dots there, with a couple big ones, of course. Primarily centered around, I guess that would be the Netherlands, Amsterdam area. And then you can also see in China, with a lot of these headquartered in Beijing, perhaps, and then also maybe traded in Shanghai, which is kind of an interesting change. So, but very focused, you can kind of say maybe in Asia there, and then you can see a few details in Singapore there, and then even Thailand, and then you can see a couple there in Mumbai, and even in South America and Brazil. And so distribution by revenues is kind of interesting to look at. So you could say, hey, that's maybe about $25 billion on average for most of these 500 top companies in the world. That's a lot of money every year to be making. And profits, though, are a little bit different than revenues, right? So on the left there, you got a green circle showing maybe around $5 billion. So basically, it's 5 to say 25, right? So if they're total, so that gives you an average profit of about 20%, say. For most of these companies, but just interesting to see. So the real question we're asking here is, what is publicly traded, and how does this? But this is kind of the search process. So there really isn't, believe it or not, a website that just says, "Hey, these are the ADRs." Kind of a specialized question, actually, which is one of the reasons. But the largest companies in the world, there's opportunities to get involved with them, even if you can't trade with them. Working with them and things like this. And before we get too far along here, I just wanted to say that it is really tough to study all the ADRs. So if you're looking for like a complete, comprehensive idea, yes, I'm trying to do that. But the way I went about it wasn't really by looking at specific companies. I'm kind of looking at the overall situation with international companies. So this is kind of like an odd thing to double check on, but in terms of when we're studying these, we also want to look at employer size, so the number of people that are actually helping the places that work on these things. And I was just a little bit shocked to see that U.S. Department of Defense and People's Liberation Army are the number 1 and 2 largest employers on Earth, with populations in the millions of people working for them. And then in addition, you see Walmart, McDonald's, and National Health Service. But there's also another way to look at this of just, semi-private companies as well. And from that perspective, Walmart is basically the largest on Earth. And then you see China National Petroleum, China Post Group, State Grid, but basically a few Chinese companies. and a motherboard manufacturer, which is pretty cool to see, and then Volkswagen and Amazon being a huge employer as well, and even larger than Snowpeck and these others. Amazon has more employees than the United States Postal Service, apparently. So, anyway, interesting to see these data. So there's a lot of detail here to get started, right? So of the say top 70 companies in the world, and some of these are not tradable from foreigners, but basically you see that the profits, the red lines are about at 10 billion, and then a whole nother magnitude for assets and then also sales, right? So if their sales are at 100 billion on average, the profit is about 10% of that. So that's 10 billion versus 100 billion. And their total assets are even another scale above that. So that's at like basically 1 trillion, right? So if your sales are at 100 billion, your total assets are about a trillion, which is an unbelievable amount of money, and your profits are basically at about 10 billion. So this is a very big generalization, and this is only looking at the top 70, but super interesting to see. I had to kind of crunch through the numbers here myself to get this graph, and I hope you really like it. And you can see from just a regular plot, this is a non-log graph on the vertical axis. You can see that basically it's really hard to see what's really going on unless you do it on a log graph, right? So you can see the assets are kind of various. I mean, some assets are in the 4 trillions, and you can barely even see the profits on here, which is a very bad sign. And you can kind of see the sales figures. But you don't see the exact number unless you look at the log graph. So I just love log graphs in general. So profits do vary significantly depending on each of these largest companies in the world, and you can kind of see the graph here. Basically, just because you're number one doesn't mean you have the highest profits, but certainly the top few here do have significantly more. When you look at 1, 2, 3, 4, and it may be even J.P. Morgan Chase, there's something wrong with their calculations here, and that may be a big warning sign. But anyway, so you can kind of see that there's a general trend, maybe even towards honesty, and you can kind of even see that the Saudi Arabia Oil Company has the most profits, and even Berkshire Hathaway has a lot of profit. But and then these others, you can see Apple is pretty high there, and Microsoft. But basically the general trend. So you're basically looking at a lot of data here. This is about the top 300, maybe 400 or so companies in the world, and looking at their assets, their profits, their market value, and sales. So it's a little bit hard to read in this chart. So basically, what I did is I changed it to a log graph. And on the left, you have billions of dollars, right? So basically, you can see a lot of them around 15 billion or so in terms of market value, and then you can kind of start to see that the assets is maybe around 5 to 10 billion on average for most of these top companies. And then you can see the sales really ranges, and there's certain little spikes in here where the profits are different. And then also on the first chart, I have another one here I'm going to show, but on the first chart you can basically see that there's a lot of detail in the first few. You can kind of see some market value ones pretty high, and then also kind of the general assets going down as you get to the smaller companies on the right. To kind of find a list of essentially, or even make up a list, I thought about actually just writing some code and kind of estimating some of these things, and actually I probably should do that. But here's a list from the Forbes Global 2000. There's also a Fortune 500 list of the global largest companies, And they both make it pretty difficult to kind of study the data. You can't really easily download it. You got to select it and add it and paste it and do all these kind of things. But you can see, of the two largest companies in the world, the ICBC and the China Construction Bank, so their market value in terms of the amount of money that people have invested in them versus their assets are quite different. So a lot of this is based on estimates, right? So how do you estimate how much all these assets are worth? And you can kind of see, Agriculture Bank of China, Berkshire Hathaway, J.P. Morgan Chase, and a lot of these are basically based on assets. So market capitalization is a little bit different because, for example, Apple here has a market capitalization of, say, $1.2 trillion, and their assets is still a lot, $300 billion. And man, you wonder what do they own? That would be a whole research project in itself. And then their sales almost equal to their assets. So, and profits as a percentage of the sales. And I believe, this is per year. So, anyway, and you can see the other companies here. Some surprises, even with AT&T and some others, Toyota. There's a big difference between a cell phone and a car, and yet cell phones look like a little bit ahead here, or even computers. And then basically, but these top ones are probably mostly real estate related. You could kind of say, or energy related, or even insurance. You have this insurance company in China. But there's just a huge list here. You can just go on and study them, and certainly it's really worth the time. Some of the largest companies in the world, and believe it or not, these are the largest companies in the world, and many of them are oil related. It's kind of hard to say from this debate. We've been looking at the Forbes list and the Fortune list, and it's just kind of a debate. So what I did is I kind of narrowed this down here to basically so we can kind of compare across certain sectors, because it's kind of hard to say, because say, J.P. Morgan might be one of the world's largest companies, or some bank in China might be the largest corporation in the world, but it's hard to compare those. So and further, they're not even traded on an American exchange. So in the background, I put the S&P 500, and you can kind of see, I want to just highlight a couple of key points here. So if you look at the details right around here, which is in February of 2009, you can kind of see that the S&P 500 started to take off relative to the rest of the world, right? So prior to that, you can kind of see that the S&P 500 was doing pretty good, and even back in here too, but certainly you can see an abrupt upward change since then. And really, it was definitive by 2010. And the reason this is important is because, we're trying to study international companies here, but really, American companies are huge right now, a lot like Japan in the 1990s. So back in the 1990s, many of these world's most important companies were just totally different. Toyota, Honda, essentially Sony, basically Japanese companies. A lot of people bought Japanese products, and that kind of changed. So where that changed, in some senses, you could say, was pretty recently, and certainly we're missing Indian companies from this. There are a couple Chinese. So you can kind of see, and I also wanted to look at the log graph here, so I'm going to just change this to a logarithmic scale, and you can kind of see different waveforms. On the top here, you see the S&P 500, and it's just a bunch of different stocks, so it's going to be different prices. But on this, you can kind of see overall what's happened to these different stocks. So I just wanted to click on a couple of them here so you can see. So SHI, that's Sinopec, and it's kind of this line going through here. And then you can see RDSB, and that will highlight here, and you can kind of see it's basically this guy right here, kind of going through there. And then you have PTR, which is Petra China, another Chinese company, BP, and then I just added ExxonMobil just because it's interesting to see how Exxon fits in with all these others. French company, Total, and then Gazprom, a Russian company, and then BNP, and then the last one is a Brazilian company that I'm kind of tracking. But anyway, you can kind of get a basic idea here. Add up a few of these companies. So basically, one of the problems here is that first of all, there's a lot of these companies. This is just a short list, and then also, how do you find the ticker symbol and things like this? So, and I wanted to kind of start with a confusing example of PTR, right? So Petra China is not even listed as one of the large companies here, and yet it is a very large company. So you might even ask, so there's Sinopec and Petra China, and maybe Sinopec is called Petra China, or different names like this. So, but basically what we're going to do here is search for each of these names. So you can just, let's say, Sinopec, right? So, so you have Sinopec, and you can kind of see here, you got their ticker symbol here on the New York Stock Exchange, and then also some Hong Kong versions, and then even a Shenzhen and SZSE, and then Shanghai index as well. So, and then even other kind of companies mixed in here that we don't even know. So, and then there's this OTC holdings as well. It is confusing. So, but essentially, this all traces back to the Chinese company, right? So let's do a Royal Dutch Shell here just to see Royal Dutch Shell and see what comes up. Okay, so you basically have a couple of them, right? And then under this example, you have A and B. So this is also confusing. What I've basically found out is one of them is traded actually in the Netherlands area, Amsterdam area, and the other one is traded in London, right? So, but yet they're both, that's where their stocks derive from, and there's actually tax significance on each of these. And then there's even a name here on the Amsterdam exchange, on the Euronext, which is a pretty large exchange. And then you have this one, RYDAF. So this is a foreign bank. Sometimes they have Y's on them, and so on. So and there's just a whole lot of others. You can see one traded in perhaps Germany, and then the London Stock Exchange, and some others. So it could be very confusing, but these little American flags kind of help to say where they are. So and then before we want to do China National, let's do state grid here. It's grid, and they are actually a Chinese company. Let's make sure we find them here. So, and a little bit hard to find. So you can see that there's it's not even sure which one this is. So, but basically this is kind of the process, and you kind of have to do the research to find out which one it is. And that's pretty much why there isn't any big list of all of the companies out there that anyone has made. It's really simple. Who these companies are, essentially what we have to do is try to find out essentially what the largest companies are, and of course I'm not just interested in that, I'm also interested in a number of people that are trading them, so like the volume. But what I did here is you can kind of select non-US companies and get a list here of these, and then that way if you do just a regular US list, it doesn't show you, it's harder to see just the ones that you're interested in. But you can kind of see some of these largest ones, and many of these are traded. So basically what you need to kind of remember is there's two types of ADRs, and there's actually three types, I would say. There may even be more types than that, but essentially, they end in F or Y typically, or they just have a regular ticker symbol. The F means that it's like a foreign bank that is doing their financial transactions. The Y means basically American bank. And there's some advantages of that. I think a lot of people prefer having the American side, having an American bank handle the stocks and things like that. I called up the local company that I was using and just kind of talked about these kind of things with them. Cool little gadget here. You can kind of see what's going on. So this shows you can. What I thought was really interesting is seeing that a lot of these companies right on the top here, you can kind of see what's been going on. So basically, what this means is they're ranking over the years, right? So you can see that recent, pretty much all of them, but a lot of them have actually stayed pretty high over the last, I guess this would be 30 years of time. So it's just interesting to see what happens here. You can try it out yourself. And then on the reverse extreme, you can kind of see what's been going on here in this range. Kind of see, and then the middle range, kind of seeing in the middle here, and then of course the upper range. And I just thought it was interesting to see a couple of these guys on the top and do the same kind of trace, kind of see more chaotic distribution along this. So, and yeah, but anyway, cool little visualization. I really liked what they did here. Some nice JavaScript and valuable. So what I would say first of all is that no one's really come up with a good list. And certainly there's a lot of disagreement between who the largest companies are, and even what the total value is of these companies, their revenue, or even their market capitalization. So basically, you can see that this is the Fortune Global 500 list. There's also a Forbes list that you might check out as well. Probably look into that in a moment. But basically, you can see that of these largest ones in the world, their revenue is almost upwards of $500 billion, and I believe that's per year, right? So. And you can see most of them are, petroleum, energy, and automobile related. So basically, these are the largest. And you can see that quite a number are in China. And then on that small little, or maybe not so small island, Japan. So Japan is certainly a huge part of Asia. And certainly, with very big companies like Toyota and Honda and others in China, those are very significant. And you can see that United Kingdom, while it has about the same amount of area, certainly is about half of what Japan is. So, and you can even see Germany. So you can kind of see France and Germany together because their neighbors are about 60. So that's slightly more than Japan, but there's more surface area for France and Germany. And then you can see Switzerland shows up here, and Canada, and Netherlands as well. So, but basically some overview. So the question that we have to ask here is, so how do we find which companies can be traded and where they are, what they're doing, and these kind of details? 500 list, and this is the list specifically for companies not in the United States. So you notice on the right here, nothing from the United States. And then this list, the Fortune 2000, or excuse me, Forbes 2000 list. This has some of the United States companies mixed in. So basically, what we're going to try to do is make sense of both of this. They have different metrics. You can see that BC doesn't even show up, and the Fortune 500, does list these guys. So I guess part of that is that public, how companies are traded, maybe, and just the overall analysis. So you notice that they list the assets here, but nothing in the trillions like they list for the Forbes list. So. And of course, the Forbes list has more, about 2,000 companies. So it may be a little bit wiser to trust the Forbes list, but who knows? We're going to look at a few of these companies in specific. website. Not sure if it's going to be around when you look at this, but it's this. It's got a list of pretty much everybody. So it says developed Europe, and then it's got a list of all the ADRs in each of these countries, and then developed Asia. So you can see, China's missing. Anyway, but it says Hong Kong here and so on. Uh, but uh, but anyway, and then you got Latin America, Brazil. You can see emerging Europe. I'm not sure why they list China on this. China's doing pretty good. But anyway, so and you can see Philippines and Thailand and so on, and then emerging Europe and so on, and then Middle East and Canada. Yes, Canada is foreign, and different ADRs by sector, which is great, and just a whole lot of information on ADRs. So, but anyway, if you're interested, take a look at this site. It's right up here, topforeignstocks.com. Probably worth a look, and I've had fun just selecting different countries and kind of looking at it. But it's still a little bit hard to see what are the most traded. Complicated to try to find out what are the ADRs that are tradable, and from the North American side. So these are basically what I did is I did a list of public corporations by market capitalization. So I'm not an expert with this, but essentially you can see the values of these companies, and these are all $1 trillion plus. So kind of the complex thing here is that Petra China, Apple, Amazon, Microsoft, Saudi Aramco, and Alphabet. So there's two sides to this. If you're a foreigner, how do you trade it? Or if you're an American, how do you trade some other foreign company like Saudi Aramco? And I'm not totally sure how to do all of that, but we're going to get into some details about a few specific companies that are tradable, and some of the differences involved. So here's kind of the largest publicly traded companies, and for better or worse, some of these are American at the top here, and there are some very interesting ones that are not American. And you can see some Chinese companies, Alibaba, Tencent, and so on. And even some questionable ones you'd say, well, is it American or not? Like Visa and some others, because so many, essentially, they are the credit card business. And people do this all over the world. So, but basically, to start with, I kind of want to look at what these companies are and who they are, which ones they might be, and just get about an interesting topic, which is basically international stocks or ADRs. These are companies that are traded internationally. Some of them are traded as what's called ADRs, and that means you can basically buy and sell them on the from the American perspective. But so we're not really going to look at any American companies. We're going to look at all foreign countries here. And what I did is I created a screener here. And for a while, I've been really interested in volume. So basically what I did is I went ahead and selected basically every single country with the exception of the United States, and did what is the largest volume, and then looked for the mid-cap, large-cap, and super large companies. So these are basically companies that have a lot of total value, and then went ahead and did a search on this. So this is the result of that search, and it was just kind of interesting. What I did here is basically this is 100, believe it or not, 100 million or more shares traded, and I believe that's per day, unbelievably. So some of these companies, I've kind of been a little bit annoyed because some of the top volume ones obviously are these really penny stocks. And we don't even know the currency value here because sometimes Yahoo writes different values. I'm not sure exactly what some of this means, but to make a long story short, you can see that These are the most traded ones in the world. But you might ask yourself, so what can I trade if you are trying to do an ADR for a company? So some of these are foreign companies that you can trade. Like I notice Vodafone is maybe one here. And some of these others, because they're so large in terms of their market cap, actually are tradable. So we just basically wanted to research this whole concept and study this. So since we are studying some of the largest ADRs in the world, it's important to kind of know the structure of what's going on in China. And it's really cool to see at the bottom of Wikipedia, they kind of give you a breakdown showing if you click on Sinopec here, and then I get the details. You can see they got kind of the each of the different divisions and some of the other, essentially the big three, right, in China. So, and you can kind of click on each one of these and find out a lot more details. So, but basically, this is the overall structure of what's going on for these particular ADRs, say in China, the very largest companies. Of the largest companies in the world is Snowpack, and interestingly, on some of the other lists we looked at, China Petrochemical shows up. So certainly, there's several different versions, all kind of working within the same group, probably in China. I'm not sure on the exact details, but if you look at this, it says parent company, and then this is a state-owned asset supervisor. So, but in the fine print, you'll read here that it's listed on the Hong Kong Exchange and Shanghai exchanges. And I just wanted to show you one other. I'm not sure exactly what the details are and how this translates. So it can be very confusing. It's confusing for me, but you can see this SHI ticker under when you search, and it shows that it's Sinopec Shanghai Petrochemical. So not sure if this is exactly the same one. So it can be confusing in terms of trying to figure out. And there's another one, of course, Petra China. To get started here, though, you can see the PE ratios and the earning per share. Those are pretty good because remember, what helped me a lot is like calling up. I called up my other stock exchange broker person and basically asked, spent on the phone and just kind of asked him, so what do I need to know about trading these kind of things? And basically, it came down to you got to understand the exchange rate, so you got to do a calculation on that, and then you got to find out how many shares are the amount that you're trading. So one of the things that's really annoying is that sometimes they list, the number of sponsored shares. So you could say, all right, I'm paying $24, but how many shares is that? You can kind of just quickly estimate if you go and find the other one, but there's not a simple way to do that, and they really should list some details about that kind of stuff, and they just don't. They try to simplify it, but in the end, it maybe doesn't help. So these are the largest companies in the world, supposedly, at least by market capitalization. And by no means is this the list that I want to use for this whole study. I'm just starting off this way because it's kind of common sense to look at the ones that people are already investing in. I'm for sure interested in ones that are not necessarily the largest companies in the world. They can also be in a lot of trouble because they're overvalued. Usually you want to buy a company that is undervalued, not necessarily the largest. So, but Petra China, so what you do is on Wikipedia's page, you can kind of click on this, and then it will take you over to a page like this. And then on the right, you can see that they say NYSE and then PTR. And then these are the Shanghai Stock Exchange and Hong Kong Stock Exchange ticker symbols. And certainly it is a very interesting concept to be trading in Shanghai and also Hong Kong. And then you might ask, well, what about Shenzhen? And why wouldn't they just trade in Shenzhen or something? So, a lot of foreign companies do this. It's kind of strange. Like even in India, you might see there's basically two stock exchanges just down the street from each other. One is called the National Exchange in India, and the other one is the Bombay Exchange. And some companies are traded basically on both. I don't understand exactly everything about how that works. Kind of mysterious. You'd think that calculating what the company's worth could be problematic. But interesting to see nonetheless these companies. So we're not going to look at any American companies today. We're just going to look at some of these foreign ones. And you'll notice that there is nothing listed here for New York Stock Exchange. So I don't know the details. There may be subsidiaries or even related companies that you might want to look into. And that's kind of the stuff that I'm interested in. More of like, smaller guys and interesting projects that these bigger guys are working on. But it doesn't really list anything. It just lists the Saudi Stock Exchange ticker symbol, and it has a nice little ticker 2222, which is kind of funny, I thought. But the good news is you can look these up on certain websites. And we'll probably do some of that later on, but you can kind of see the list here. So Petra China, this is one that's super interesting, and actually you can invest in, and they are super large. Petra China, and what you see here, we're going to kind of go through some analysis, but essentially this says, Petra China sponsored ADS. And basically 100 ordinary shares. So basically what happens here is you kind of got to figure out, there's a couple big problems here, right? So we got to figure out the exchange rate, and then we got to figure out how many stocks you're buying. So and through some mathematics here. So this is a log graph here, so it's not linear. You can see, for one of the supposedly biggest companies in the world, this is a major drop. And this is a major up. And you can kind of see some leveling out. So, this is kind of an interesting time, heading all the way back to price levels of around here. But again, there's different, companies release more shares over time and details like this. So you might want to look more at some things like price to sales ratio, which I have down here. And you can see a pretty good price to sales ratio, and kind of hovering at around 7, 8 price to earnings ratio. So those are nice numbers to use when you're thinking about these, because obviously you have to do some mathematics to really figure out what the price is, because it looks like you're getting a different number of shares for this $35. So roughly speaking, 5 to 1. So for the currency, so you just multiply by 5 and get the RMB or yuan value in Chinese currency. So, you can also look up Chinese currency. So Chinese is yuan. So you can see U.S. dollars to yuan, and we'll just look at that graph really quick here. So, actually, I'm way wrong. 7. So this is up at around 7 for the currency. So sorry, I was thinking of a different country here, but basically around 7. So you can kind of see what's been going on over the years. And certainly they've been losing value, so that's very bad for China, obviously. And it makes the stock price very complex, right? So basically it's about 6 down here, and then heading back even further, you can kind of see what's happened. So, and actually, back around 2000, it was 8. So maybe doing slightly better than before, but kind of going back to some struggling times. And then early in the history, back in the 1980s, you can see the currency going all the way back. So super interesting. I've done you can see some little analysis that I've done before here. It looks like I was doing comparing it with Hong Kong, Malaysia, Singapore, and a whole lot of others too. I remember this. But anyway, so just to kind of get started on the currency. So, but again, you can kind of see this PTR stock here, and it just gives you some ideas about what's going on over its entire history as a company. And this is the non-log graph, so it looks like this spike may not be as significant when you look at the actual chart under a log graph. And we'll load that up here just so you can see. So basically what we were looking at here is this little spike, and we basically want to see what that means. Sorry about this. I'll just click on all and see what this is. So that spike is this spike here. So you can see, yes, it was pretty significant back in around 2007, and then a pretty serious drop too from the world financial crisis. And you can kind of see what that means here. So I love log graphs. They're just way easier to understand in terms of the real prices, especially when you look at long-term changes. Quick reminder here. So you can see this company, Tencent. You click on it and you notice that they are not traded at all on the American exchange. Certainly, even though these largest companies in the world, some of them maybe are a little bit less international than you might think. And you can see that these guys are located in Shenzhen, it's kind of strange, right? You see they're located, they have their stock traded in Hong Kong, but their tower is located in Shenzhen. Why aren't they just located? I think this is the that's Hong Kong exchange. Well, anyway, so have to find out some details. We're going to mainly look at ADRs, which is foreign companies that we can trade locally in. So from an international perspective, what we were talking about before, a couple time frames here are extremely important for changes internationally. So basically, there was the 2001 crash, and then by 2002, you kind of saw some start. But really, from this data, what we notice is this time frame around 2009, that pink line in February, around then was when S&P actually started to really take off. So the question is, in some ways, what we're talking about is, although really a lot of international companies matter a lot, the S&P 500 has been doing great since about 2009. Anyway, I hope you had a really fun time kind of thinking about all these ideas. If you would like, let me know what you think. Let's chat and come up with some interesting way to work together. Anyway, have fun and hope to hear from you soon.